This video does have spoilers, so if you want to avoid them, now is the time to leave. The Substance, directed by Coralie Farjat and starring Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley, has left viewers shocked and stunned, especially with its wild final act. Audiences have been blown away by the gore and the chaos, but beneath the shocking surface lies a deeper message that nobody seems to be discussing. And I'm not talking about the film's critique of societal beauty standards. There's another level. In this video, I'm going to dig into the deeper meaning of The Substance and how it transforms the film from a bizarre spectacle into something much more profound. But first up, we need to clarify the relationship between Elizabeth and Sue and whether they share one consciousness. Many viewers, myself included, found the relationship between Elizabeth and Sue a little bit confusing. In some ways, they seem like two completely separate people. They even start referring to each other in the third person, saying things like,
"She didn't respect the balance. She's stealing more and more time from me."
Or,
"I barely have any time to enjoy myself, while she wastes 7 days stuffing her face in front of the TV."
It's as though they've become two separate people. And I'll admit, on the first watch, I was saying to myself, I don't get it. What's in this for old Elizabeth? I was watching closely for some confirmation that Elizabeth's mind was switching between bodies, that there was only one centre of consciousness. But in fact, lots of things were suggesting the opposite. And I know the suppliers say, "You are one." But to me, this line could have simply been referring to their interconnectedness. They could have been one, like one tree has two branches, connected at the root but growing along different paths. Elizabeth's desire to continue with the experiment could have just been because she was living vicariously through Sue rather than directly as Sue. In this reading, the metaphor would have been something closer to motherhood.
I have to be out of town every other week to take care of my mother.
Which is an interesting take in its own right that I don't really have time to get into. Anyway, then I read the screenplay, and in the screenplay, it's absolutely clear that Elizabeth and Sue have only one centre of consciousness. Everything that Sue experiences, Elizabeth experiences, and vice versa. There's a scene that didn't make it into the film. Sue goes to apply for Elizabeth's old job. The security guard won't let her in because she doesn't have an ID, but like the scene with the neighbour, she's treated differently because she's beautiful. The security guard says, "I guess if because of the wind my pen were to fall to the ground, I would have to bend down to pick it up, and who knows what can happen when I'm not looking." He's giving her a pass. Soon after, when Elizabeth returns to the studio to pick up her cardboard box of belongings, the same security guard doesn't want to let her into the building, and she's saying to him, "I guess it's not windy today," making it clear that Elizabeth had a memory of Sue's experience and previous interaction with the guard. And that's just the first example. The language of the screenplay makes it abundantly clear that Elizabeth lives Sue's life and Sue lives Elizabeth's life. Like this line, "I can't go back inside her, I can't, she's gross." But these scenes were cut, leaving the film feeling a little muddled. Later, we'll explore why this ambiguity might have been intentional. On a second watch of the film, I did find the validation I was looking for. It's the little things, like how Sue knows that she needs to say her number, 503, to get the supplier to speak.
Yes, hi. This is Elizabeth Sparkle. I'm 503.
Yes.
Hi, this is an emergency. There's no more stabilizer fluid. Hello? It's fucking 503.
She knows because she had the same experience as Elizabeth when she'd called earlier. And since I mentioned her number, if you turn it upside down, you'll see that the 3 becomes an E for Elizabeth, and the 5 becomes an S for Sue, and the 0, the circle, is representing their unity. More evidence for a single consciousness comes from when the guy in the diner is saying,
"It's long, isn't it? 7 days.
It's long because she's waiting to get back into Sue's body. And of course there's the slapping scene where she's saying,
Stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it.
She's trying to remind herself that she's essentially one driver with 2 cars, 2 bodies. So if you were wondering about this, then I hope this helps clear things up. What is obvious is that Farjat wants to show us how the pressure on women to be beautiful is a kind of violence. The pressure doesn't just come from the outside. It ends up turning inwards, and women end up beating themselves up, pursuing dangerous beauty treatments, and attacking themselves for not being good enough. Elizabeth has been indoctrinated by society, and taking the substance is an act of self-harm. As the movie unfolds, Elizabeth and Sue increasingly stop seeing themselves as one, reflecting Elizabeth's own mind being torn apart by this pressure. Her older self resents Sue for being young, while Sue despises Elizabeth for getting older.
It was a bit old-fashioned. Jurassic fitness, really.
This split, this self-violence, is something that Elizabeth has learned from society, a reflection on how deeply these pressures run. Now, most people who watch The Substance will see this message. They'll get it. It's about the violence of beauty standards and the toll it takes on women. But this is just the start, and I think the message goes deeper. And in these next sections, we'll keep peeling back the layers to uncover what this story is really about. What I love about The Substance is how it takes a woman's internal struggle between her past, present and future selves and brings it into the light as a real-time external conflict. It's hard to capture the inner workings of a mind on film, but by externalising this battle, the movie makes it visible and visceral. Here's the thing, I think in a way, we all live through this same struggle. The you that decided to eat that whole pizza screwed over the you that lies there afterwards feeling sick. The you that stayed out partying till 3 AM and got blind drunk created a big problem for the you that needs to get up in the morning and go to the office at 9 AM. There's obviously an addiction metaphor. The substance is, after all, a drug, and Sue needs to inject herself with Elizabeth's spinal fluid every day. The actions of our present, in the moment self can have painful consequences for other selves in our timeline. And that tension between different versions of ourselves plays out over the decades as well. Our younger selves don't always think about long-term consequences. If you only knew how I cursed the young guy that carelessly ran up all that credit card debt that this idiot got stuck paying off. It's easy to see how our younger selves don't always look out for our future selves. But there's another side of this struggle, how the older self can sometimes be at war with the memory of the younger self. This is a little more nuanced. When we try to hold on to youth, when we believe that we should still look or feel like we did in our 20s, it can almost be like an insult to that younger self. Let me be clear, there's nothing wrong with desiring to feel attractive at any age. But youthful beauty is meant to be fleeting, unique and special in its own right. And by trying to recreate it in later life, we strip away its value and misunderstand its nature. In clinging to this idealised version of herself, Elizabeth doesn't only hate who she is becoming, she also starts to hate who she was. I started to wonder, why is it so hard? I mean, why doesn't Elizabeth just change? I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek here, but she's obviously exceptionally good at DIY, and she's a great chef. She's got other talents. Look, it's wrong that she lives in this cruel world, but why can't she love herself? Isn't it easier to change yourself than to change the world? Well, maybe it isn't. I started to think about another idea that we pick up from society and internalise. In many traditions, especially Western culture, the self is seen as a fixed, eternal me that lives inside the body, like a driver of a car. This is implied by everyday phrases like be yourself, find yourself, people never change, your true self, young at heart, you're only as old as you feel. The idea of an unchanging self is even built right into English grammar. When we say, I am beautiful, or she is smart, it's implying a fixed characteristic, reinforcing a fixed, unchanging core of who we are. And so we can begin to feel like the me right here, right now, is in a way the finished product. But in reality, the self isn't a thing. It's a construct, a process, constantly growing, changing and evolving. The self is more like a wave than a rock. Part of Elizabeth's problem in The Substance comes from her attempt to not just hold on to her beauty, but to hold on to a static idea of herself, as though her identity could be locked in time, like a river held back. But the truth is, just like our bodies are always changing, our self-identity is always changing. But Elizabeth refuses to accept this truth. And it's not her fault. This is what society teaches her. It's a double whammy. Not only does society tie her value to beauty, but it also enforces what I'll call identity standards. The pressure to believe in a fixed, unchanging self.
You haven't changed a bit. You're still the most beautiful girl in the whole wide world.
Just as beauty standards confine women to specific ideals of attractiveness, identity standards trap us into the idea of a real or authentic self that doesn't adapt over time. This lack of flexibility is what makes aging and change so painful. Instead of appreciating her past self for what it was, Elizabeth tries to keep her identity frozen in that moment. So you're saying there's no such thing as a real me? I'm not sure that it's an easy question to answer, and I think maybe that Farjah cut the scenes that clearly confirmed Elizabeth and Sue had one single consciousness to intentionally leave us speculating as to whether different versions of herself are really one true self or different entities. No, she didn't. So remember, Sue and Elizabeth are a metaphor for the inner workings of a woman's mind, a struggle between past, present and future selves, all under the weight of society's expectations. In a way, we're all Elizabeth Sparkle, wrestling with the inevitable changes of time and the pressures that urge us to stay the same. So I'd moved from thinking about beauty to thinking about an identity struggle. One of the main themes of The Substance is the fear women have of losing their place in society as their body changes. Director Coralie Farjah has said in multiple interviews that the film is about how women, as they grow older, often feel like they're losing their relevance, almost as though they're becoming invisible. As time passes, there's this underlying fear that the things that gave you value in society are slipping away. The Substance hammers home that anxiety repeatedly. It's a misunderstanding if your main takeaway is that this film was about the Hollywood entertainment industry. Hollywood is just an example, and the movie isn't just about how celebrities are discarded. It's much broader than that. The film points the finger of blame towards the male gaze. We see this in the sexualization and objectification of women from characters like Harvey and most of the men in this film. And there are powerful men like that holding women back. It's a fair point. I don't disagree with this critique, but I believe it's only part of the picture. Striving for a place in society is something that affects everyone, men and women alike. The equivalent for a man might be the pressure to not be a loser. Women value winners or high-status men, not just financially, but socially. This is why it can be devastating for a man to lose his livelihood. Please like and subscribe. Please, please. In a way, The Substance is like a female version of the movie Fight Club, where women confront the pressures of beauty and aging, just as men in Fight Club, feeling like devalued cogs in the machine, grapple with power and status through violence. Both films are critiquing the destructive extremes of gender expectations. In The Substance, Elizabeth's pursuit of beauty to the extreme is a form of destructive femininity, while in Fight Club, the men turn towards a destructive hyper-masculinity. The root cause in both cases is the same: the fear of becoming irrelevant.
Are you sure? Once you stop, you can't go back. You will simply remain on your own.
Now, I realise that some might feel discussing destructive masculinity here could seem like I'm shifting focus away from the feminist message of The Substance, but that's not my goal. I'm shifting focus to reinforce, not undermine, the message, so bear with me. This isn't a "what about the men" argument. I want to show that Elizabeth's battle for meaning and relevance is because she's a human being. She's struggling with something that all people struggle with, albeit in different forms.
I don't know what you're talking about.
She doesn't just want an identity, she wants an identity that is valued by other people.
It gets harder each time to remember that you still deserve to exist. That this part of yourself is still worth something, that you still matter.
And that's why the film is called The Substance. It's not just about the drug. It's about what it means to be a person of substance, someone who matters. Elizabeth isn't really chasing beauty. She's chasing significance. She wants to matter, to be seen, to have substance in a world obsessed with superficialities. And that's a real human problem. I think that's partly why Farjah is tackling this subject matter through the lens of body horror. Our bodies, our physicality, are a reminder of our animal nature. We are human beings. We are all striving to survive, but we don't just want to be, to exist. We want more. We want to belong, to matter, to have a meaningful place in society. Another way to say a place in society is that we want status. But I don't just mean status in the narrow sense of power, wealth, or dominance. I'm also talking about belonging, having meaning, and feeling valued. So the deeper we look into the substance, we see layers about beauty, and then identity, and then underneath that, a human need to be someone. Oh yeah, someone like you that really understands the film better than everyone else. And status is a tricky thing. It can be both a blessing and a curse. On the one hand, status gives us a sense of belonging, of value. It defines our place in society, and for most of us, it's something we strive for, whether through beauty, a sense of importance, or feeling loved. But status is incredibly fragile. It's something that can be gained, but it can also be lost. And when it's tied to something as fleeting as youthful beauty, the fear of losing it can drive you crazy. We tie so much of our identity to things that are temporary, and when those things slip away, we're left scrambling, just like Elizabeth. And it's tempting to say that status and competition are the problem, but they're also the source of so much of our joy. Many of life's pleasures come from things that improve our status, from earning respect and finding a meaningful role. If we were to eliminate the battle for status, we'd also eliminate many of the joys that come with achievement. And so it's a trap, because we can't escape it. That's not to say things can't be improved. I do support strides to more egalitarian societies. And of course, we should continue to create more opportunities for women to achieve status in ways that are not tied to appearance. But even with those efforts, the struggle to matter is universal and inescapable. But what's funny about that? So the last 20 minutes were chaotic, grotesque, and frankly ridiculous. Initially I felt the shift to humour undermined the film. After all, what's funny about Elizabeth's battle to matter? About women struggling to belong? Or about anyone fighting to find meaning in life? But then it hit me. This isn't a mistake. Farjah is ramping up the humour to make a point. I started to feel like I had the power to understand the film's meaning and ending more deeply. Remember, what's playing out is a dramatisation of the inner workings of a woman's mind. Farjah's mind, if you like. And it doesn't matter that that kick is unrealistic physically. Sue doesn't kill Elizabeth. Remember, they're one. Weirdly, what we're watching is a traumatic healing, a reintegration of self. So when Sue attempts to use the activator for a second time, we meet Monstro Eliza Sue, a grotesque fusion of Elizabeth and Sue. In a way, the monster is closer to the true self, because we're not only our younger self, our older self, or our present self, we're all these things. We're this ever-changing mask that cracks and reforms and is never quite whole. But behind the mask, we're the gore, the blood, the guts, the joy, the pain, the struggle. We're the animal caught in the battle for existence and meaning. Farjah leans into this absurdity, because ultimately, that's what life is. Absurd. The pursuit of status is in many ways a losing game. No matter how hard we try, we can't hold on to these things forever. We're all going down with the ship, aging, losing relevance, and eventually facing the end. Every identity that we construct will eventually collapse one way or another. I'm gonna live forever. I'm gonna learn how to fly faint. Shh. I'm trying to make a serious point here. Sorry about that. It's absurd because we're all fighting a losing battle, but it's precisely this fight, despite its futility, that makes life worth living. Elizabeth's face on the monster's back was inspired by, let me say this right, Edvard Munch's The Scream, symbolising the anxiety of the human condition. Eliza Sue is also a warning, embodying the very thing that Munch's screaming figure was screaming at. Interestingly, demonstration and monster share the same Latin root, meaning to warn, but the warning isn't that you might turn into something horrific. Monster Eliza Sue is fine with how she looks. The monster isn't what Elizabeth has become. It's a demonstration, a demonstration of what she always was behind the mask. It's a visual representation of her anxiety and struggles. Notice the difference in how Monstro Eliza Sue gets ready to go out compared with Elizabeth's earlier torturous time in front of the mirror before her date with Fred. She's no longer an object of beauty that Harvey can mould for his success. She has accepted herself and integrated all the different versions of herself across a lifetime to become whole again. But when the mask slips off, society is confronted with the thing it fears the most, a mirror reflecting the dark depths of its true nature. The blood spraying scene is, of course, a big fuck you to society, especially the male half. And it's a fuck you to you and me too, because the blood splatters on the camera lens, breaking the fourth wall. We're all complicit. And here's why. Because sometimes it's through our own struggles for status and meaning that we end up contributing to the problem. The blood is a metaphor for the uncomfortable truth splashing all over us, forcing us to look at the darker side of human nature and the society that we create. So society rejects Elizabeth, even after she's accepted herself. But luckily, she breaks a leg and is finally freed from her body. Their need for status can create a brutal competition where each person's pursuit can overshadow others. So in a sense, it's the very thing that Elizabeth desires that is, in a roundabout way, the cause of the reason that she can't have it. It's as if life's pursuit of meaning is a game, and without fair play, it can become vicious. Every kid knows that games need rules. And we do have a simple rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The golden rule. But this rule breaks down if people don't care or understand the harm that they're causing by pursuing their own significance. Farjah's shift to the absurd is an invitation to step outside of the game, to see the struggle for meaning and belonging from the outside so that we can see it for what it is. And yet, in the end, she still crawls onto that star as a face on a pile of slime. Now we're down to the core of not who Elizabeth is, but what she is. The will to have substance and meaning is the real matrix, the mother of all those identities. It's not beauty that deserves admiration, and it's not even the persona she wears as a mask, but the raw, relentless drive, the sheer guts of the girl to survive in a vampire-like world that wants to chew you up and spit you out. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that Elizabeth or women like her need to change while society can remain unchallenged. Society absolutely shares responsibility for the standards that push women to do these crazy things. But we need to remember that society is created by the individuals of which it's composed. What I'm suggesting, what I think Farjah illustrates with humour, is that where we still push for societal change, there's a value to allowing ourselves some flexibility, a lighter grip on the need to perfectly conform or resist those standards. Look, you can fight it, you can despair, or you can laugh. And in the substance, Farjah chooses to fight and laugh. And humour's usually more powerful than preaching, so it's a smart choice. At this point, what we're looking at isn't even really Elizabeth the person anymore. In the script, Farjah calls her the mush of Monstro Eliza Sue. She's no longer Elizabeth, she's the mush of Monstro Eliza Sue. And that's when the spotlight finally shines on her and she receives the admiration that she's been chasing her whole life. Maybe we're being shown what we should admire most in people. Stripped of all the superficial layers of the self she thought she was, or who society demanded her to be, we see her raw, essential drive to exist and to matter. That's her essence, her substance, her most authentic self. And maybe if we can see that, it's the beginning of a universal empathy that could extend to all people. We can see the humanity in all people. And when the mush fades away to nothing and eventually gets cleaned away, if we can accept that in the end we all fade away, maybe winning the game of life isn't so important after all, and maybe we're all chasing something that we already possess. Our own relentless drive to matter, our raw guts to exist and matter, maybe that's substance enough. And if we can see that in ourselves, maybe we can see it in other people too. And we don't need to step down on other versions of ourselves in different stages of our life. And we don't need to step down on other people who deep down aren't so different from us after all. You don't have to talk a lot of shit. What a load of nonsense. Will you be quiet? I'm trying to make a video here. This is serious. Yeah, you keep telling yourself that. Be quiet. Look, be quiet. I've got to finish this video. I have to finish the video. I have to finish the video. It's all a waste of time. It's all a waste of time. Nobody's going to like it. I have to finish the video. I have to.